I'm the marketing coordinator here at CentriNet, and I'm here with Tom Ditzbalas from VMware. The webinar today is going to be covering virtualization and cloud management, featuring VMware's cloud management tools. Just a few quick housekeeping notes before we get started. We will be taking questions at the end of the session, so if you have any questions, please use the question box on your GoToWebinar control panel. And if you send those in, we'll read them at the end. We'll get through as many as we can. And we will also be recording today's webinar and posting it up on our website later. So if you know of anyone else that you think should see this later, it will be up on our website, www.centrinetcorp.com. And just look under the Events tab, and you will find a full list of all of our webinars that we've done. And with that, I will hand it over to Tom.
Thank you, Valerie, very much for inviting me and letting me speak about the cloud management and how it specifically tackles the virtualization environment. Let me see here. Let me get this going here. Oops, too fast. So just a quick, some more housekeeping here from an agenda perspective. Just want to tackle what the cloud is from a high level, VMware's vision of management, and how VMware is supporting that move to that to the cloud environment. Then specifically, we're going to talk about vCenter Configuration Manager, which will help customers get compliance under wraps, provide them with visibility across their entire enterprise, utilizing the VCM tool. After the quick PowerPoint, we're going to walk into a demo, and then, as Valerie mentioned, we're going to slide into some Q&A. So just to give you a little background about myself, I was a contractor at IBM for about 5 years. IBM had a lot of internal controls that we were constantly being monitored, highly audited environments, constant state of audit. So from an administration perspective, it was very difficult to, one, gather that information, and then two, report on it in a very readable way, I guess, presented in a nice fashion. So having walked the path of an administrator as well as understanding the pains associated with those audits is something that VCM is going to help our customers with. So as we kind of follow the agenda here, the first introduction is about the cloud. So as we progress from those mainframe days when we were scheduling jobs, getting that basic management under wraps. It's slowly migrating to that distributed computing, out of that mainframe more into that distributed computing environment, multiple servers for multiple applications. And as those environments grew, obviously systems management became that much more important. Finally, as we progress through the cloud, as we progress through the web, we finally move into the cloud. And really what we're trying to do here is deliver IT as a service. And it's really going to change the way businesses look at IT today, from that cost center and turning IT into that IT as a service, providing valuable resources on demand to the business, and making sure that IT is aligned with those business initiatives. So when we talk about the cloud, there's really three high-level characteristics of the cloud. The first one being that, well, if you take a step back, let's kind of put a definition around what cloud computing is. So it's definitely not a box that you can throw in your server rack room and say, wow, I'm part of the cloud now. It's more of an approach to the way that you treat IT or computing in general. So what we're talking about from a cloud perspective is leveraging the efficient pooling of on-demand, self-managed, and virtual infrastructure that the business consumes as a service. And those three characteristics kind of follow suit in being able to efficiently, through utilization and automation, deliver those services to the business. So utilizing your existing infrastructure, whether you're moving from a physical to a virtual environment, making sure that we're utilizing all those tools and that backbone or your infrastructure, and we're managing it through that automated fashion, efficiently, effectively. So as users come online and they require resources, it's provisioned automatically. The deployment of services, the deployment of applications, what have you, are all done kind of in a zero-touch manner. The next thing is agility with control, right? So We want to be able to have those users out there on demand request those resources and have those resources available almost instantaneously. So being able to control how we deliver those, being able to scale, securities, making sure that all those are enforced across that those new resources so that they're in that compliant and controlled state. And then lastly is the freedom of choice, right? Multiple applications, multiple server environments to supply those requests in a flexible manner. So those are really the high-level cloud computing characteristics. So from a VM perspective, we tackle that in really three major key areas for if you want to include IT business management. So when we start talking about infrastructure and operations, the problem associated with that is that, VMware is great in saving us money from, floor space to data center real estate, but it also introduces some complexity into the environment. VMs are now more likely to be spun up much more quicker. Previously it would take weeks, if not days, if not weeks, to bring up a resource, say a server or what have you. Now that can be reduced down to 20 minutes. So the complexity that's introduced by virtualizing the environment, we need to make sure that we're managing that environment properly. And this is where we're going to concentrate on today when we talk about the vCenter Configuration Manager Suite. If we go up a layer, on top of that infrastructure is where we house all of those applications that represent that functionality, IT as a service to the cloud. So we have management tools to make sure that those applications can be migrated from one silo to another effectively, efficiently, understanding what dependencies need to be moved from that particular application, that cloud application, as well as performance, right? We want to make sure that the applications in that cloud are performing properly resourced, what have you. And then the third piece is obviously the end user, right? We're all here to support that end user. Users are what drives business. So understanding that from an end user perspective, they don't care where they get those resources. They just want to be able to check their email or have that cloud storage available to them from no matter where they are. So as I mentioned, we're going to concentrate on that blue layer on the bottom and the problems associated with that and how VCM can help. And again, just kind of driving through that graph again, you'll notice that we have that infrastructure layer that obviously sits on that VMware provided infrastructure. The management capabilities from VCM, from the newly acquired Alive enterprise acquisition, which does performance analytics, capacity, chargeback, all of those are associated with that infrastructure layer. And then if we move up to the application management, we also have those applications, ADM, vCenter App Speed, and Lab Manager. So it's just a high level overview of the applications that we provide. So now that we're driving down into vCenter Configuration Manager, at a high level, vCenter Configuration Manager, VCM, provides customers with the visibility they need to effectively manage their environment cross-platform. So you'll see here at the top note that we do servers and workstation. We understand the configuration items from each of those supported platforms, being able to centralize that data, and then at that point allowing our customers to report on that information, check for compliance in an automated fashion. And then more importantly, if it's available for enforcement, we can actually go out and bring that non-compliant condition back into a compliant state. So on top of the Windows and ESX platforms, we do support AIX, HPUX, all of the heavy hitters on the Unix side as well. And again, being able to centralize all that data for you. Virtualization, deep collection, and visibility. Obviously, if we can't understand what's out there to manage, it's very difficult for our customers to manage those platforms. So providing visibility across those multiple platforms in regards to compliance, change, patching assessment, and centralizing that information for our users. One of the other things we do that's more, kind of along the lines of compliance is understanding change in the environment. So if we can provide a number associated with a compliant state and understand the changes that are bringing that number down, change management is just that much more important to effectively manage your compliant states. We also do the application provisioning. So we're talking about intelligent compliance from a software provisioning perspective. VCM is able to deliver those packages to one or multiple servers so that that software environment is in that compliant state. And then patch management as well, so being able to assess the environment and deliver and deploy those patches as needed. So, you know, when we dive down into talking to our customers, a lot of the challenges revolve around these questions, right? So the first part, again, is kind of revolves around that visibility question. What do you have? So understanding, you know, where those key financial application servers are for that drive business, we want to make sure that those systems are configured properly. More importantly, for our customers that are under scope for PCI or Sarbanes-Oxley or HIPAA, any of those regulatory mandates, we need to ensure that any of those systems are in a compliant state at any given point in time. So VCM, as some of you may be aware, audits kind of, everybody scrambles when audit time comes around, you know, putting out those fires, making sure that screenshots are delivered, everything's up to snuff before those auditors come in. And there's really a peak of activity before that audit actually happens. VCM's approach is to not do that rush and put out those fires at the last moment before the auditors come in, but more importantly, keep your environment in a continuous state of compliance. Instead of doing that check once a quarter or once a month or, you know, once a year, we can do that check on a nightly or weekly basis so that we're always in that compliant state. So some of the other challenges that revolve around is root cause. So a lot of analysts out there that say 78% of the outages are caused by just misconfiguration out in the environment. And then more importantly is when we do finally have these outages, the longest portion of that outage is figuring out exactly what went wrong. So as I mentioned before, we have the change management capability to allow us to view those particular changes across the enterprise or on a particular system to understand, hey, here's the particular changes that have occurred that might have caused those particular outages on that bot. So again, understanding change in the environment, pervasive change, and bringing that change under wraps. Kind of running along the lines of change again, what changed and who changed it. So if we can understand the change that's occurring out in the environment, we can then either control that change or understand how that change is affecting it, and being able to reduce that particular change that might have caused outages in the past. Also, the who changed it is more important, so that, you know, once we understand that change has occurred, we can actually tackle who changed it to understand where that change might have occurred someplace else, or whether that, forgive me if that user needs a pink slip for providing unauthorized change in the environment. So again, just visibility out in the environment as to who changed and what changed it, as well as the impact. So, you know, if we understand that we need to reboot an ESX box, what VMs are going to be affected by that particular reboot, so we can understand those physical relationships and virtual relationships and kind of remove that tribal knowledge, right? So knowledge is power, and if we can provide that much more knowledge out in the environment, we don't have to worry about contacting a specific user. We can go to a tool like VCM to provide you with that knowledge. And then more importantly, our bread and butter is the compliance piece. So again, repeating myself from earlier, collecting that data from the environment, those important configuration items, assessing it against the desired state, and then showing you the gaps between the two. So that's really how compliance works, and I think that we tackle that in a very effective and efficient manner to make sure that we're ensuring that continuous state of compliance. So with VCM, obviously configuration drift. As those changes, those unauthorized changes are occurring, that's going to slip us out of a compliant state. So what we want to do is continue it, you know, repeat that continuous process of collecting data, assessing that data, and then if possible, remediating that data to a compliant manner, to a compliant state. So out of the box compliance toolkits to understand, you know, from a analysis and remediation perspective, and verifying that, you know, the environment I'm expecting out there is truly there, and VCM is going to be able to report on those conditions. So which takes us to kind of the whole understanding of VCM and how it actually works. So you'll notice at the core is we have this VCM database that collects all of these changes out in the environment. And when we talk about change, it's more along the lines of how is it changing from my expected state. So we all have this idea of a gold image or a standard build that as a system hits the production wire, here's the pristine environment that I'm expecting. At that point, two things happen. The first is unapproved change, or drift as we call it, and it's the actual state, right? So an application owner will get to his server, and once he gets his hands on it, he will install his applications. He will change his registry keys to modify those apps, what have you. Anything that's really done to a particular server, it kind of falls into this actual state, right? On the other side, we have this approved drift. So as we apply patches, as we're rolling out updates to antivirus, more specifically, that new standard build is going to evolve into that new standard. And as you can see, there's all this change happening in the environment that we need to be made aware of and understand whether that's good or bad. So VCM is able to take the information from all of these states, from a standard build, the new standard, to an actual state, and compare those changes against that compliance or that expected value from your environment. So tracking changes from your PCI standard, or even if it's not just a regulatory mandate, maybe it's just an internal controls document, we can pipe those technical controls into our compliance engine so that those audits that are continuously eating up your time and resources, we can do that in an automated fashion. And then from a change management, digging down deeper into kind of viewing those technical changes against dates, against particular machines, or if it's a configuration type, if we know that specifically a piece of software was installed, well, we can actually click on the software data type and understand the changes that have occurred in that particular data type. So in the end, we wrap up all this, the environment, into that VCM database, which again allows us to check for compliance, patch assessment, change information, and represent that data any way you'd like to. So when we talk about comprehensive configuration coverage, on the Windows side, we represent over 80,000 configuration variables. And as we get into the demo, I'll go ahead and show you some of those. I won't show you all 80,000, but you get an idea that very quickly we gather tons of information. And that all goes back to providing our customers with the visibility so that they can effectively manage their environment. So again, at the core of it, the management data repository that houses all of these configuration items. And then if you read along the list here, the types of data that we are able to collect. Along the bottom, you'll also notice that all of the supported platforms that VCM is able to collect information from. So if we move along here. So this is really where a key differentiator for the VMware vCenter configuration product lies is the content associated with that functionality, that collection functionality. So it's one thing to get a tool that provides you with a framework, but it's also another thing that if we can provide our customers with the ability to hit the ground running, so to speak. So with these compliance toolkits, you can import these rules and these templates so that as we're collecting this data, we can almost immediately start assessing the environment against these regulations. So you notice that this isn't a comprehensive list, but it gives you a pretty good idea of some of the regulations, whether it's industry standards or just best practices, of some of the content that we have available to our customers. So anywhere along the lines from regulations Sarbanes-Oxley, GLBA, to the health industry regarding HIPAA. We can assess those environments against those regulations and properly assign a number that gives you an idea of how compliant or non-compliant a particular environment is. Keep in mind also that we do have customers that need to comply with Sarbanes-Oxley, but the functionality can also be used to practice those best practices, hardening guidelines, or if there's a project available to you where, for example, something specific like upgrading your antivirus, we can actually set that expected state. Here's the value I'm expecting from an antivirus perspective. Show me where I'm not compliant. and then we'll actually trend that over time as well. So on top of regulatory mandates, you can use this also as a project workflow or even just internal IT controls to assess against. The one thing to mention too is down here in the corner you'll see we have a group called CP&C, and what that says is it's the Center for Policy and Compliance, and it's a group of industry experts back at our corporate offices that actually read through all these standards. They update these standards as needed, and then as these updates flow out to our customers, it's just very easily downloaded, imported, and within minutes you're off and running with a new set of standards. So just keep that in mind as well. So at a high level, again, talking about that achieving that continuous state of compliance. So let's reduce that quarterly audit or that yearly audit into a more continuous state so that we're not scrambling to put out that audit fire once that time hits. Kind of running along the lines with continuous, that configuration drift, understanding changes to the environment. How is it affecting my compliance percentage, and then more importantly, if it does fall out of scope, let's bring it back via automated remediation if that's the option you so choose. One of the interesting features is that we provide for roles-based access. So when we talk about providing auditors with a particular view of the environment, we can lock down or expose any type of functionality in our console. So at the high level, you may want your executives to understand that their compliance posture, and they may have only read-only access to the console, whereas your Unix and Windows Server admin may have keys to the kingdom. Your audit group may have access to only a read-only of the compliance state. So again, you can mix and choose how you want to present this data and who has access to what. Some of the configuration capabilities matrix, so you can see here some of the questions that we ask our customers when we walk into environments. So from a tool consolidation perspective, as we get into the demo, you'll notice that it does quite a bit. So being able to take those point solutions and possibly roll them into VCM is something that we try to accomplish for our customers, saving them, efforts, costs, maintenance costs, all that good stuff. Inventory and baseline, so again, kind of following that path. What do I have? How is it configured? Is it illegal or authorized software on that? So again, visibility into the environment, how those systems should be configured, and exactly what do I have as of today. Change management, we talked about that, and then more importantly, the compliance and vulnerability, understanding how I match up to those industry expectations regarding SOX or PCI, what have you. And then in summary, so when we talk about compliance and remediation, lower that audit exposure and that audit risk in an automated fashion. So again, collecting that data, assessing that data, and then if possible, remediating that data so that we're ensuring that in a continuous state that our environment is in that compliant posture. Managing both, keep in mind that even though we're VMware, we do manage both physical and virtual environments. So just keep that in mind as we walk through here. Change management, I think we beat that dead horse, so we'll skip over that. Hardening in environments. So, understanding where certain configurations might expose security breaches. Where does that condition exist? Find that condition, remediate it, and then use our compliance engine to continuously monitor to make sure that that particular breach doesn't expose itself again. And then as we touched upon as well, provisioning, both from a software provisioning as well as a patching, understanding the assessments from a patching perspective, and then being able to deploy them as needed. So Valerie said we're going to save the questions to the end. So if you don't mind, I'm going to jump into the demo here. So I hope everybody can see this. I'm sure Valerie will let me know if we don't have views here. But what we're looking at right now is the actual VCM console. You'll notice that it's all internet driven, so all you need is web access and an AD account, an Active Directory account to access the console. Now keep in mind the roles-based access will provide me with particular views if I so have configured them. But as of right now, I'm logged in with the keys to the kingdom as an admin, so I have full access to the entire environment. You'll notice along the left side, we have these sliders that represent different portions of the product. Up here in the console is where you'll have your high-level reporting from a dashboard's perspective, trending, any type of change management activity will be noted up here. If you scroll down a little bit in the console slider, this is where we can do our ad hoc reporting, some of the data types that we do collect. So we talked about services, registry keys. This is where we start getting down into the zeros and ones of the product and understanding the 80,000 data points that we are collecting. We'll come back up to here on this. But from a compliance perspective, here is the compliance engine. If I scroll down, you'll notice the available content that we talked about here that CPNC is providing to us. You'll notice also that there are a number of different platforms that we support. So, from a DC perspective, understanding DISA. We can also go from a PCI perspective, understanding, the Linux environment, the Unix environment, however you want to break that down. We have content associated with all of those different platforms. So if I click on one, it represents the value expected versus the value found, and presents that in a graphical kind of way. So we'll talk about this here in a little bit. Just wanted to kind of scratch the surface here. From an Active Directory perspective, now instead of taking information from the actual operating systems and systems out in the environment, now we're exposing the information in the Active Directory database. So the same type of functionality you'll see here, we can then apply to the AD database. So preventing you with all the change information, particular schema changes that it might have occurred, any type of site changes. So again, same type of configuration, just pointing at the AD, Active Directory database. Reports, I will touch upon this, but reports are neatly organized, and I believe there's last I heard was over 400 reports out of the box. These reports can be modified, they can be created from scratch, and a lot of the information that we used to use, as I mentioned back in my IBM days, I could have used these reports and reduced my work by 90%. This report alone could have saved me a day of work, and now all I need to do is run it, and due to the information we already have in the database, you can see here that we have a very quick understanding of passwords not used in 90 days. But again, we cover logically organized. Like I said, I won't spend too much time in here. And then more importantly, the patching piece. So both the assessment and deployment. So understanding the patches that are delivered by Microsoft and or these other platforms, AIX, HPUX, Red Hat, understanding what patches I have available to me, understanding how those particular patches are installed or are not installed in the environment, assessing that, and then being able to deploy those patches in an automated fashion. And then the administration tab is just basic VCM administration, so I'm actually not going to spend any time in here today. So if you scroll up, what I like to highlight here is just some of the data types that we do collect and the associated information with those data types. So just a high level, this is what we call a node summary, so a high level report. This is showing us Windows machines by operating system. If we want to drill down into specific portions of the graph, we can go do that as well. So here are my 6 Windows Vista Enterprise server or workstations. But if I wanted to look at all those servers, I could turn off that filter and get that representation, that zeros and ones information that drives that graph we saw a few minutes ago. So if I scroll over to the right, we can now start seeing that 80,000 data points that was mentioned before. Plethora of information in here, last user to log on. Scrolling over to the right, all of the associated hardware information, CPU counts, logical versus actual. So again, very rich, very granular information exposed very neatly in from the environment. Another thing that I tell my customers is, when we start talking about questions of the environment, I really try to push my customers to go to VCM to get those questions answered. And an example of that is, if we follow a use case here, if we wanted to take an understanding of VMs in a particular domain, all I need to do is drag and drop those column headers up to the top. And let's say I want to get OS name as well. So very quickly, very easily, I can see those VMs in a particular domain and then broken down by operating system. So as you'll notice, we took that list of 50 or 60 servers. I've asked the question, show me my VMs in SE world broken down by OS. Well, now I've drilled down and very quickly, very easily, I've exposed that information via the interface. You can see here I've taken that list of 50 down to 2 servers. Now I have that question answered. I can tackle these 2 specific servers in the environment. So keep in mind, whenever we're in this view, we have that capability to perform that ad hoc reporting on the fly. You'll notice we do collect processes, so understanding that one-to-many relationship. So here's the CTF mon. Where is it running? Do I want to end that process? Again, we start talking now about the remediation capabilities of VCN. So I notice that this process may not be authorized to run. I could end the process right now at a scheduled interval, and then VCN will actually go out and kill it. Let me see if I can find something here with a little bit more. So here's that one-to-many relationship I was talking about. Here's the command exe. Here's the associated PIDs with it. Duration, what's the memory utilization of that particular point in time. So we can get an understanding that, hey, you know what, this should not be running. Let's end that process across multiple systems now. And then everything ends with that scheduler run now or schedule off hours, what have you. A couple more data types that I'd like to show is from a services perspective. Windows is very hard alone to manage, but from a services perspective, there's anywhere from 150 to 250 services running on a window box at any given point in time. So when we have that management nightmare, having an interface like this to represent that data very neatly helps those administrators out there to effectively manage that environment. So here what we're looking at is the Windows services and the startup status. So here are my automatic, here are my disabled and manual services. You'll notice I gravitate towards this 212 because it's supposed to be running in the environment because it's automatic, but it's showing here that it's not. So I could either right-click, start, stop, change the associated properties with that, and even change the account. But if I wanted to actually see that particular group of services that are not running, again, using that filtering capability, filter by display name, and now I get a very comprehensive list of those particular servers that aren't configured properly. So I can click on Security Center. If I wanted to go ahead and start these particular services, I could do that. Again, everything ends with that scheduler. Or say I wanted to change the properties associated with those particular services. So the startup type, first failure, what do I do with those? We can modify all of those settings. And then as we finish with those settings, again, the scheduler will go out and enforce those particular conditions. Now, this is great from a point-in-time management perspective, but what we're really driving after, again, in this cloud environment, automation is key. So what we can do now is if the Security Center service is supposed to be running across my entire enterprise, I can now come down to a compliance template, and again, it doesn't have to be regulatory. It could be just operational type of templates. I can create a template for my Security Center and say, if I find this condition to exist, if Security Center is installed, it must be configured with these expectations. So services, must be set to the startup type to automatic and the condition to always be running. So with our compliance engine now, we can configure that expected value, and then once we start collecting this data, we can continuously assess the environment and effectively, in an automated fashion, manage it. One of the things here, too, is I noticed that, from an account perspective, maybe it's using the wrong account. So what I can do here is I can configure that service to run as a local system account, whether it be a dedicated domain account, and then more importantly, restart the new services with those new logon settings. I can also kind of take a reverse approach to it. So where do I have service accounts out in the environment? So this is a lot of problem with our customers. I used to do the same thing back where I used to work. Is I used to deploy an application, use my own account to deploy it, and then when I changed my password, that application broke. So the key here is to make sure that we're using dedicated local system accounts or dedicated domain accounts to ensure that services are always up and running and configured properly. So what this is showing me is all my service accounts out in the environment. And as I mentioned, that reverse kind of approach is what services is that account currently running as. So here's one for SE World VCM service. If I click on local system, you get an idea. This should be a pretty comprehensive list here, as this is a pretty common service. But as you can see here are all the associated settings with that particular service. So again, it's that reverse approach, and if I did want to go ahead and change this, I still have that same functionality here. Another thing, too, is from a local accounts perspective as well as domain, we get an understanding of which ones are enabled, which admin accounts are enabled, disabled. I can drive down into this data to understand, show me the true configuration of my administrator account. You can see here, if I turn this off, I should have now all the listed local accounts. And if I wanted to go ahead and rename this administrator account, I could highlight those accounts, rename to something more secure. Or I could also change that password on the fly as well. So we had a customer that used to take them weeks as new admins came online, it would take them quite a while to turn over those local admin accounts and what have you. We with a VCM product, we were able to reduce that 2 weeks down to about 30 minutes. So the ROI there, the return on investment is pretty severe, and again, automated, effective way to manage your environment. So as we start talking about compliance now, taking all of those data types that I was showing you here, being able to set that expected value, whether it's from an operations perspective, a best practices point of view, or whether your organization needs to comply with regulatory mandates such as SOX or HIPAA. So as you can see here, as we touched upon this, we scrolled up and down to show you the comprehensive list of compliance templates. If I take just PCI, that seems to be one with teeth these days. So if I click on PCI for my Windows 2003 servers, what this graph is going to represent is the overall compliant state of my Windows 2003 servers in this demo lab. So the overall compliance is 100% non-compliant. So what we're saying here is that for every machine in this particular scope, there's some sort of non-compliant condition that exists on every one of these boxes. Whether it's 1 or 100, we're going to consider that system to be non-compliant. You also notice as we scroll down a little bit further, we start getting a breakdown of the rule severity associated with my asset classification. So in the compliance rule group itself, you can set the severity level for that particular rule. So for example, the banner you might get when you log on to a server or your workstation might be considered low, whereas a critical rule could be something more along the lines of making sure that any virus is up and running. And then along the y-axis, you have that asset classification to represent vital assets such as domain controllers or Exchange email servers. Those are going to be your vital assets, and then not classified or minor assets might be a dev workstation, what have you. So what this provides you with is a game plan of attack so that you're not looking at, let's scroll down a little bit more, you're not looking at 1,200 not-compliant conditions. You can chop it up and say, here are my 84 not-compliant conditions for my vital moderate rules. If I scroll down into that, I get a representation of the actual data driving that graph. So if you scroll over to the right, here are all the conditions that we're checking against. I like to do it this way. It's a little bit easier to read. So you can see here for the payment card industry, here's the actual rule. So from an audit directory services perspective, this is the values that we're expecting as noted in PCI. So the value we're expecting is yes for audit failure. The value we found on this particular server is no. Is this enforceable? Yes. So what I can do is I can very easily right-click, hit this enforce button, and you'll notice that we don't have to make any changes. We already know what that expected value is. All we're going to go out is hit that system, make sure that we're setting that correct CI to that desired state. So if I went and hit finish, it would go out and contact that system and fix that non-compliant condition. The other great thing, too, is when we start talking about automation now is we have the option to automatically bring these non-compliant states back into compliance. So as we do our collections, we see that conditions exist via, or non-compliant conditions exist. We can schedule that compliance run to run, and then if we do pick up non-compliant states, you have the option to automatically go out and enforce those compliant conditions. These rules are configurable, so they're not hard-coded in any way. As a matter of fact, I tell a lot of my customers to go down to download Sarbanes-Oxley just for the simple fact that it is the most comprehensive list of rules. So we're trying to avoid that reinvention of the wheel. If we have rules that already exist, let's copy them into my own SOX, Organization A SOX compliance template, so that I'm not reinventing the wheel, and I'm making my life that much easier when it comes to that compliant posture. So they can be copied, moved around, finagled any way you'd like to fit your environment requirements. So from a patching perspective, the way we work, it's similar to compliance. You'll note here that we have a list of Microsoft-related patches, or if we wanted to go down into Red Hat, we could do that as well. But as you see here, we have those bulletins that are available to us by Microsoft, by Red Hat. And what we do is we wrap our own helper file around it. So it's really taking the knowledge from Red Hat or Microsoft and then saying, here's what we see this particular patch affecting and what have you. So you'll notice from this Red Hat patch, we're looking any type of reboots, any supplemental patches that may be required, also the affected products. But if you'll notice, if we, actually, let me go to a Windows patch a little bit down. This one. So as we start talking, again, similar information, but as we start talking about the assessment capabilities, we don't just go out and check add and remove programs or the registry keys. We actually ensure that expected DLL version files or file versions are correct. So if this 8.8 was an 8.9 or an 8.7, we would see that particular condition exist, and we'll flag this particular patch as not installed. So it's very granular, very surgical as to how we're doing our assessment, so that we're providing you with a true visibility into that patching environment. So it's very easy to assess, again, with this capability to filter through that information. I could very easily say, you know what, I want to assess my environment against critical patches for the month of February. Or you know what, let me do it for the first Q1 of 2011. So I'm going to take these. I'm also going to take this patch, if I can just figure out how to work the mouse. All right, it's not working for me, so let me just go with my original there. All right, so I'm going to create a template just for my critical patches for February. There's the associated patches. And very easily, very quickly, I provided myself with that assessment. So now when I come into here, I'm going to view this data grid and then hit this assessment. So again, what it's doing now is it's taking those values from the environment that's already contained in our database that we've collected in a previous collection and comparing it to that, excuse me, that expected value. Excuse me one second. So it's now properly, it's assessed that environment. So now when I come back in here, here's that graphical representation of my patch status. So you see here for these groups of servers, against those patches, I'm in a 100, basically these boxes have not been patched at all. You'll notice that we have a breakdown of how we classify each of these patch statuses. If there's affected product and it is patched, we'll obviously signify that. Not patched is pretty self-explanatory. Unknown is almost as dangerous as not patched because we have no visibility to how the system is currently configured. And then more importantly, patch not needed. So you know what, we have this. We didn't find an affected product. Maybe it's an SQL security related patch, but Excel is not installed on that system, so we're not even going to bother with patching it. So if I drive down into this 164 not patched, I can get a breakdown of what the suggested patch is. So again, that filtering capability makes it that much easier. Here are the suggested patches. Also, some other conditions that may not be exposed in other products out there is, you know what, I can't even install this patch because there's an OS service pack that needs to be applied beforehand. Other conditions that may exist say, I deployed the patch, but I did not reboot that system, and a reboot is required. We can flag that condition as well as that pending state, reboot state exists, and then allow you that visibility and say, hey, you don't need to deploy the patch. Just go ahead and reboot the box, and we'll reassess and make sure that it was properly installed. So if we go ahead and walk through a quick deployment, what I can do is highlight any of those patches or en masse across all systems, but just for the sake of time and example, I just wanted to deploy this one particular patch. So we now properly assessed. Now what we want to do is go ahead and deploy those systems, or those patches to those systems. So what this is doing is listing out those particular patches. Where do those patches exist? Is it found on the internet? Did I not found? I'm currently not connected to the internet, so I don't have access. But what it does is it just does a quick check to ensure that we can download that patch from Microsoft. Also, when do we want to run? Do we want to download now or at a later time? And if there were multiple patches, we could then change the order in which those patches will be deployed. Also, advanced switches if you need to. And then this is a new feature here. Do I want to deploy the patches or stage the patches now at a later date, during the deployment, what have you, as well as the deployment schedule? Do I want to just stage the patches now and then schedule that deployment later on tonight during off hours? I can do that. And then we also have a, I wonder if this one does not require a reboot, but we also have the a reboot option. If that patch does require a reboot, we can also set up those variables as well. This particular patch does not have it, so we won't have that reboot functionality here. But in conjunction with the staging and the deployment, we can schedule a reboot, again, off hours, right after the deployment, what have you. Also throw up a notification if need be. So again, the flexibility into how you want to deploy those patches is all done through the console, and very, very easy to configure and push out. So for the sake of time, I did want to leave a few minutes for questions and answers. So at this point in time, Valerie, if you want to open it up for questions, that was the 1,000-foot or 10,000-foot view of the product. So I'm sure there's a couple questions out there.
Okay. Well, if anybody has any questions, please go ahead and type them in on your GoToWebinar panel, and we will answer them. Right now, I am not seeing any questions.
Okay.
You got a minute? Okay.
Yeah. While we're waiting for questions, one of the things I forgot to mention is our change management log. So I know we talked about it in the PowerPoint. Be remiss if I didn't cover it a little bit. So as we collect data in the environment, we represent those change information in this graph here. You'll see how it's neatly kind of broken down by data class. So if you know that a particular device driver might have caused an outage, we can drive down into that and understand what kind of device drivers changes have occurred. You can see here, again, questions of the environment. Let's go to VCM for those answers. And now from a device driver's perspective, I can understand what drivers were installed that may have not been authorized or what have you. So we do have, while this is coming up, so here's that list of drivers we were talking about. So we can see here that these were added a while ago. Again, this is our demo environment, so it's a little bit stale, but you can see here we changed the value from, and we changed it to. So since this is an install, we weren't expecting any values, but we could see that actually, let me show you here this way. So here's where that value changed from and what it changed to. So obviously, since this is a new install, we don't have any previous information. So again, it represents what we thought we had, and what we have now, and represents that to you. Keep in mind, if it's available, we can roll back those changes in an automated fashion. So if someone was added to the domain admins group, we could right-click and say, you know what, this user should not be in there. Let's remove that. And again, since we already have the previous value, we don't need to know what that was. We just go ahead and roll it back to the way it was. Okay. So,
Okay.
Valerie, do we have any questions?
We do. We've got one question. Can you tell me, Tom, what is the time for implementation of the system for an environment of maybe 25K desktops?
25K desktops? That would probably take maybe 2 to 3 weeks. So the whole deployment, obviously there are a lot of variables around that. Environment, you know, what's the network look like, you know, how many users are online at the particular point in time that we're trying to deploy. So there are a couple of variables, but if I had to guess, in my experience, I would say that would take probably a good 3 weeks to get an environment of that size out, just because workstations, again, are a little bit more dynamic than servers. So I think that would be a safe assessment.
Okay, great. Thank you. That looks like all the questions we have for today. Great. I just want to thank you, Tom, for your presentation today. It was very informative. And thank everyone who spent some time with us on the webinar today. We appreciate you taking time out to listen to our presentation. And just as a reminder, I will be posting this webinar up on our website. That's www.centrinetcorp.com. And if you have any questions about VMware, about the things we talked about today, everyone at CentriNet would be glad to help you. Just send us an email at sales@centrinetcorp.com, and we would be glad to talk to you more in depth about it. Thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.